In mid-2020, as the coronavirus pandemic was exploding around the world, this is what the situation looked like right here in Germany. The country was hailed the world's shining star of coronavirus containment.
Germany.
Germany, by comparison.
Germany, where hospitals are not yet overwhelmed.
But the number of deaths in Germany has remained lower than many other countries,
Now, things look very different than they did last summer. While countries like the UK and Israel are going back to normalcy, Germany has been under some form of lockdown for over 6 months.
On Germany's intensive care wards, this is what the third wave looks like.
Hospitals have been pleading with the government to tighten restrictions.
Going on like this will destroy the economy, will destroy the people, and will cost lives.
So, how did we get here? How did Germany, a country known for its efficiency, love of planning, and rationality, lose control of its COVID-19 response? Problem 1, indecision. Germany was able to flatten the first coronavirus curve by acting fast. In March 2020, politicians were quick to impose an almost complete lockdown. As the second wave started picking up speed, critics say decision makers underestimated the virus, much to the frustration of scientists who had called for harsher measures much earlier.
Und ich bin es ehrlich gesagt etwas leid. Wir haben den Sommer damit verschwendet, darüber zu diskutieren, wie gefährlich ist das eigentlich.
It was November when politicians finally took action. They imposed a partial lockdown.
Weil wir auch den Bürgerinnen und Bürgern versprechen können, diese Maßnahmen sind befristet.
Needless to say, this partial lockdown was only partially successful. Not only are these measures still in place, but they've been tightened. Germany never went into a complete lockdown. Politicians were hesitant to fully shut down workplaces such as factories. On top of that, new variants have made the virus more aggressive. Criticism of politicians' indecision has grown louder.
Und in dem Moment, wo der Staat falsch, schlecht oder langsam handelt und es sterben deshalb Menschen, finde ich, ist der Begriff Staatsversagen durchaus gerechtfertigt.
The inability of politicians to quickly decide on uniform measures is partially down to how the country is governed. Germany is a federal republic. Decision-making is not centralized in the hands of the Chancellor in Berlin. Instead, each of the country's 16 states has its own government, which can decide on things like law enforcement or education. This system is there for a reason. Germany evolved from hundreds of little royal states. After World War II, federalism was enshrined in law to avoid falling into a dictatorship ever again. But this system also means, when it comes to fighting the pandemic, that every government has the right to decide on its own rules. In an attempt to find a unified approach, there have been regular discussions between Chancellor Angela Merkel and the 16 state premiers, which, unlike the spread of the coronavirus, can be very, very slow. These meetings would sometimes last for hours. They would go into details like, should schools open? What about hairdressers? Would a curfew help? And the list goes on. In the end, there would often be no uniform measures to combat the virus. People in the population are frustrated.
Nobody knows anymore what the regulations are right now. I think it's chaos, especially if you look at the different vaccination strategies.
In early April, a poll showed that 4 out of 5 Germans are unhappy with how the federal and state governments are handling the pandemic. Another reason why Germany has had a hard time getting out of this ongoing lockdown and fighting the pandemic is bureaucracy. In a pandemic, tracking cases is crucial to break down infection chains and slow down exponential growth. In Germany, it's the over 400 Gesundheitsämter or public health departments that are in charge of tracking infections. Their methods are sometimes very outdated.
They are still working mostly with pen, papers, telephone. They try to do contact tracing and it doesn't really work.
COVID has exposed just how antiquated Germany's bureaucracy actually is. For example, how much it relies on this. This is a fax machine. A technology that's nearing its 170th birthday. Fax machines will scan in an image on one side, transmit it through a phone line, and print it out again on the other side. Magic. In Germany, these things were used to transmit COVID-19 test results.
Es zeigt eigentlich, wo wir stehen, weil das hat mit digital nichts zu tun. Also auch wenn dann quasi die Übertragung dieses Bildes digital erfolgt, alles das, was da drauf steht auf diesem Formular, das ich jetzt faxe, kann ich faktisch ja nicht digital weiterverarbeiten, weil es liegt nicht digital vor. Das ist zwar nett, dass der Bürger was hinschicken kann, aber in der Verwaltung tippt dann dort jemand den ganzen Mist, den jemand eingegeben hat, in ein Formular wieder ab.
Picture this: an army of German bureaucrats retyping faxed COVID-19 test results back into their computers. This was the reality in Germany's healthcare centers until January of 2021, when the country's health minister made the following announcement.
Seit dem 1.1. Erfolgen alle Meldungen der Labore an die Gesundheitsämter elektronisch, nicht mehr per Fax, sondern per Knopfdruck und direkt. Das ist erstens eine enorme Zeitersparnis und zweitens muss nicht mehr vom Fax dann noch per Hand, übrigens auch durchaus fehleranfällig, das dann ins System eingegeben werden.
Bureaucracy also played a role in the vaccine rollout. Of course, the rollout was slow because Germany doesn't yet have the doses it needs. But even with the vaccines that are available, getting an appointment can be frustrating. Initially, those entitled to a vaccine were notified by snail mail. Then they would have to call a hotline or go online to schedule an appointment. Call centers and online services were overwhelmed. In one case, one woman reported she had to call almost 100 times to get through. Here's one particularly hair-raising example. Vaccine appointments are organized by priority groups. The elderly, for example, are up first. But in Lower Saxony, the authorities had trouble generating a list with people over 80. So the post office had to resort to writing letters to people with old-fashioned names, like Fritz, Hans, or Adolf. Despite all the problems along the way, Germany's vaccination campaign is slowly but surely picking up speed. And it's not just picked up speed, it's really gained momentum. The country is getting more vaccine doses. Citizens who qualify for a vaccine can get their shots at their family doctors and not just in the big vaccination centers. A new federal coronavirus law has been passed. It requires all states to implement a basic set of measures when COVID-19 cases pass a certain threshold. As infection rates fall, doctors say these new measures will save thousands of lives. Politicians vying for the chancellorship in September's federal elections have made e-governance and digitalization a central point of their campaign goals. The pandemic response has highlighted many of Germany's shortcomings in areas such as digitalization and bureaucracy. Things that will have to be dealt with by the next generation of policymakers if the country hopes to regain its reputation of being a world leader in efficiency.